Welcome to Manufacturing Conversations, because manufacturing is never just only about manufacturing. So today we have our guest, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar. He's a Deputy Director of Business Development and Services at Renishaw India. Someone who has spent 20 years on the factory floor of precision manufacturing and also teaches strategy at IIM Mumbai. So that's like a rare dual vantage point that makes him uniquely credible in this conversation that we are going to have. And I'm sure it is going to be a very honest conversation. So, what got us here today is the one of the books that he is reading, the Making of an Economic Superpower by Yi Wen, a Federal Reserve economist. The book makes a very uncomfortable argument that everything India was told to do, be liberalize, build institutions, open markets, may have been a wrong advice, but and that China quietly did something very different. So we are going to get into that, what China did right, and that India is still getting wrong. So that is going to be my conversation with him today. Welcome to the show of Manufacturing Conversations by Manufacturing Today.
Thank you. It's an honor.
We thought that India has set a target of taking manufacturing to 25% of GDP, but we are a decade on. We are still like 16% to 13%, somewhere there. And when you look at that number, what is your honest reaction? Is it a surprise? Is it frustration, or was it entirely predictable?
Honestly, it doesn't surprise me because things surprise when you don't see a pattern. But I haven't seen this. We used to mistake activities for progress, and that's why people can feel surprised. But I'm not surprised. What makes me feel more uncomfortable, rather than the GDP growth of, say, not achieving 25% and being around 16%. By the way, that's much better in the last 5 years compared to a decade ago. But what makes me much more uncomfortable is that our share in global exports is still around 2%, where China's share in global exports is around 28 to 30%.
Okay.
We are world's fifth largest economy, and only the world's buys from 2% from our factories today. And that's an uncomfortable area, and that really surprised me. And from being a business builder, I have understood that the gap between a stated result versus a target is not a mere process gap. It's a leadership gap. It's a sequencing gap. So that's what the problem is. I think it's not. The problem is at more the leadership level. It's more of a sequencing level, and we have to get it right. I don't want to sound pessimistic. India has a huge future, but we have to be honest with the diagnosis of where the problem is, so that we can take the right steps to move forward.
Okay. So you have been with Renishaw's operation for almost 2 decades. And at what point did you personally start to feel that something structural, not cyclical, was holding Indian manufacturing back?
It's a good question. It's very early when I moved back from UK to India after finishing my PhD and working for 5 to 6 years at the headquarters. I remember very vividly. Initially, we were working with this manufacturing company, a very good manufacturing company, very capable company. They had excellent machines, talented engineers, and their genuine ambition. They were in the process of qualifying to become a global supply chain player, and they couldn't. They couldn't because they couldn't demonstrate that they were able to produce quality consistently. They were able to make good parts, but they couldn't prove that they can make these good parts every time right. And that told me something. There is a structural gap. And when you look at the numbers, I'll give you some numbers. So around over 70 to 80% of MSMEs in India are using outdated production technologies still. And these MSMEs account for around 45 to 50% of manufacturing output. So when the core engine for this manufacturing is not capable to produce products of international quality expectations, when the engine, core engine, is running, not meeting the global competitive demand, that's where the problem is. And it is structural. And I kept this pattern. I kept seeing this pattern, companies after companies, company owners, founders chasing the next big order instead of perfecting
what they have
on the initial one. And that's where the problem is. When companies start to prioritize speed to scale over the depth of mastery, that's where the challenge is. And that's why I thought it's a structural problem. It's not just cyclical, or it's just not a one-off.
Okay. Yi in his book says that China's industrialization makes a very specific argument that China followed a very deliberate sequence of building mass markets around its products, and before they went into the advanced manufacturing thing. So before we unpack that, how did you first come across his ideas? I mean, Yi's ideas, and what made them click for you?
Yi Wen makes a very. So I very well remember, I came across his work when I was puzzled with a question that has always puzzled me, that how did China went on from a country that was producing cheap toys to become the backbone of world's manufacturing industry that is today in one generation. I am now 43-year-old, so even in my generation, I've seen them leaping forward from a cheap manufacturer to the world's backbone of manufacturing. So that when and always the answers that I used to find or get, they used to give symptoms but not a system. So when I came across his work, and when I read that very thoroughly in a couple of other books as well, I think I started to understand what has happened. And Yi Wen describes is that in China, they were able to sequentially create mass market to support mass production. So the state's job is to create conditions and the policy that is so challenging for the industries or private companies to do, and which is very expensive as well, which only state can do. And after the state has done that, the private companies capitalize on that. And more than that, when I looked at what the great CEOs are doing across the world, so being a commercial guy, being a business leader, I evaluate companies very specifically, and I saw a commonality in training. So if, as you know, a good to great business leaders, they do things sequentially. For an example, they go out in the foreign markets when they have conquered their home market, right? They build second factory when the first factory is giving them the profits and sustainable profit, is giving them something which is very scalable. Then only they go to the second factory. So what the CEOs do, the great CEOs do, the similar thing Yi Wen is talking at the nation's level. So the framework is similar, and that's what struck me, that there is a framework here. I think I build something sequentially, build depth first, and then go on to scale. So I think that's where it struck me personally.
Okay, let's talk about the sequence a little bit more. What China actually did. They first built massive domestic demand, as per what you were mentioning, through cheap consumer goods like basic infrastructure and the low-end assembly before they even thought about advanced manufacturing. In the plain language, what is the logic behind it that they saw?
You could ask whether this was by design or whether this just happened. If I understand your question. So what happened, that the state in China, they create conditions for the market to form, and then private enterprise work within those conditions to build industry. And that's what happened. And that's it started sequentially. For example, as you rightly said, if you go back and look at where they were in 1980s, I don't know how many of our listener is aware, India's GDP and China's GDP were similar in 1980s. It's around $150 billion. Not that much dissimilar. But what happened after that is for everybody to see. So what happened in China, if I make it simple, they started to go sequentially. So they first built the light manufacturing and created the mass markets.
Yeah.
Then they went into a little bit more complex manufacturing, and then now they're into high end of manufacturing. So it was sequential. So what they could do, they could build depth. Just to give you an example. So let me give you an example which everybody knows, the mobile phones, for example. In late 80s to early 90s, they started to have the biggest market for things like connectors, cables, right? Which require light manufacturing, but they could do in volumes. Then later on, they were the first country which built iPhones in masses. And there is a debate. I think in my mind it says whether Apple made China or China made Apple. I don't know. It's even to debate. And then later on, if you look at right now in all complex manufacturing, whether it is aero engines to complex EV stuff, anywhere, I think China is there. So they went sequentially. And what happened, when they went first into the mass markets, they were able to generate capital, which they could deploy to build capabilities, what they will need as they progress up in the value chain. So there is a method which is not dissimilar to what even the first industrial revolution did when England started it. So they also followed the same. So there is a pattern with every industrial revolution, and I believe that is a pattern which I think will be successful in India as well.
But when we look at China started with toys, textiles, and cheap electronics, as you mentioned. But there is a tendency in India that we look down on this kind of industries, this kind of manufacturing. So, what do we fundamentally misunderstand about this? What those so-called low-value industries were actually doing for China? Did we kind of, the work discipline, the supply chain depth, did we really misunderstand?
Let me call that as a light manufacturing. Light manufacturing, which, as we were talking about, toys or textile,
cheap electronics.
So what happens that China became the mass market for this light manufacturing, say in late 80s to early 90s, progressing to the beginning of this century. And what it did, it somehow built an invisible but very invaluable industrial nervous system, which means it created a supplier ecosystem which knows how to do just-in-time delivery. It created factory engineers which internalized factory discipline, and it created a set of engineers who can solve real-world problems under real cost pressure. So that is what it created. So these are the fundamental capabilities they were able to build with this. I tell you, innovation and technological know-how are tacit. They can only be learned by doing it, right? So learning to build and learning to solve real world problems open doors for innovation and genuine knowledge creation in the long term. And that's what they did, and that's what paid dividends for them in the early part of this century to last decade and here. And now, if that wouldn't have happened, if they wouldn't have a mass market to begin with, I don't know how they would have understood about this creation of these fundamental capabilities, which is the backbone of what they're doing right now.
They also made some specific choices in terms of the fundamental industries to master, like steel, chemicals, machine
Yeah.
tools, electronic components. How deliberate was that selection, in your opinion? And what was the role of the state versus the private industries, which you spoke about earlier, in making those choices?
As I told earlier on, the state role is to form conditions for the market, and the private enterprise role is to build within those conditions. So they work in tandem, they work hand in hand. If you, as you said, that the choices of steel to advanced machine tool to the precision industry, so if you look at that happen very much sequentially, and that is the secret recipe there. So they did not jump, because even if they tried, even if, in my opinion, even if one would try to jump, it would not succeed. I don't know how many of our listeners know that China first tried about this industrialization not in 1982 but in 1960s. I think it was in the Mao area, late night. But at that time, it did not succeed because they had a catastrophic natural calamity in terms of hunger, and they were not able to produce enough food for the people over there. Because what happened, that a lot of those rural people got into making industrial goods, and suddenly there was a lack of people producing agriculture. And that's what did not work. But what happened at that time, that what it created in terms of the mindset and the infrastructure in terms of industrialization, that helped when Deng started again in 1980. So it started in 1960, that did not succeed. So China was very well aware that it needed to do things in order so that it could build upon layer by layer. As we all know, like, I managed many industries, and when I managed the P&Ls, and I'm sure you would have seen as well, the capabilities compound when it is done in the right order.
Yes.
And that's why the capabilities of the choices that they make in terms of, say, steel to advanced machine tool to precision industries, that's where it is now we're seeing as a compounding effect. Like it's all the compounding, as we all understand the power of compounding.
Yeah. So they also built a deep supplier ecosystem in the tier 2 and tier 3 manufacturers that nobody is talking about, and we don't get to see those also. From your experience at Renishaw, how visible is the absence of this ecosystem in India today? And any examples where, a supplier story from your operation is very short.
Okay, let me give you a success story and then tell you where I see the gap. So, in last few years, especially in last 4 to 5 years, we have been very successful in India, especially in mobile manufacturing. Okay, proud to say that we all should be proud of Tata as an organization that who has taken that long-term view and invested deeply into mobile manufacturing. And if you look at now, has created a good ecosystem to really sustain it and be a credible player in this sector. So in a way, that's a proper mass market product. And that mass market product is making a good supplier ecosystem, and which is helping both Tata as well as these suppliers, and I'm very much confident that these suppliers who are working in that ecosystem, they will use and build those capabilities to build or produce other high value products at a higher scale or higher volume. India, we always lacked mass markets.
Okay.
At best, we were mid volume and mid value product. Our largest volume was what? Bikes. That was our largest volume.
Scooters.
Scooters.
Not even bikes.
So scooters and bikes for most part of last 3-4 decades, that was our largest volume product. And you could say them in terms of the value, they're very valuable, but in terms of the value ladder, they're mid to low value, right?
Yes.
So when we are into this mid to low value and mid to low volume production, it does not help the supplier ecosystem to be built as robust, as strong as we could see in China. So I think that's where I have seen the gap. It's not the challenge of these suppliers, is having the enough demand to challenge them to raise their standards and be able to meet the demand of the global supply chain. So
Which China did.
Something which China did, I think. So that's why it always grapples me that whether Apple made China or China made Apple, because it's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic story.
We spoke enough about China. Now about India. What went wrong, and why are we repeating the mistake? Because India's industrial policy has simultaneously chased semiconductors, EVs, drones, defense, energy sectors, green energy, all at once. We are doing everything at one time. From a strategy standpoint, what is the cost of this simultaneous bet approach? And is that we spread capital too thin, or is the problem something deeper?
As a strategist and as a business builder, I can tell you very directly that having a simultaneous bet approach, or say for example, betting on 7 to 8 different sectors, is essentially, in my view, is not having any strategy, is an absence of a strategy. It not only dilutes the capital, but it starves the capability.
Okay.
Why we are doing it, I think a lot of this is driven through what the opportunities are in front of us, and that's what drive these different directions. Because at the country level, you could see that if there are 7 or 8 directions at once, for example, to EV, to semiconductors, to drones, to defense, to mobile manufacturing, it seems quite a lot. And then automotive is continuing to deepen there. So it seems quite a lot. But at the company level, maybe they can make some choices where they need to go. So, but I would still maintain that the core has to be building the depth without spreading too thin. I'll give you some stats. PLI scheme, which in my view is one of the most successful industrial policies in India. In last 6 years, since 2020, the cumulative investment has been around 2 lakh crore rupees, which is around $20 billion, $20 to $24 billion. But that is spread across 14 sectors.
Yes.
So it's a significant, but it's spread quite thin. Actually, the success story. So mobile manufacturing is where we've been very successful.
Electronics.
So that's where, if you look at today, we make, as a Tata assembles around 50 to 55 million iPhones in a year, and exports around 1.5 lakh crore, which is around $20 billion worth of iPhone that they export. So this does tell a success story that when you invest quite deeply, build your capabilities deeply, build your supply ecosystem deeply, there is a success formula, right? So 55 million iPhone being assembled in India is not a joke, right? I think
That's a caveat there. It is assembled, not manufactured.
when I say assembled, so 55 million iPhone, large part of that is manufactured in India. So Tata built this factory in India, Tata Electronics. They are building this mobile phone, which is of the highest manufacturing standard under the Apple's scrutiny. They have to meet their standards, and that's a testimony that when we invest in something deeply, when we build depth that builds the ecosystem, there is a formula to success. So I think there is that example as well. So we have to decide that how much to spread thin versus how much to build depth. In financial investing, diversification reduces risk, but in commitment toward capability building, dilution destroys focus, and that focus is needed to build the depth.
Very true. India has a reputation of producing very excellent engineers. We are everywhere.
Yes.
But it is struggling to produce excellent manufacturing operators and technicians. So he was arguing about the mass manufacturing thing, about building a workforce for advanced manufacturing. When you're building mass manufacturing, builds a workforce that advanced manufacturing can later draw in. So are we paying for skipping that stage right now, or in terms of human capital that we simply do not have?
It's an important question to introspect, I would say. Look, unless we answer some of the uncomfortable questions and diagnose our challenges well, then only we can devise our future, right? So I would say that we did miss a trick in, I think, 2 or 3 decades ago. I'll give an example which will tell us how things, when they're done right, help. We all know, because we all are, I think, millennial kids, for example. So when we all remember, I think our listeners will remember the Y2K problem that happened in 1999 at the turn of this century. And that Y2K problem necessitated a need for a massive number of engineers. And at that time, India was able to produce those engineers in masses, right? And that's what built our IT service sector business, right?
The service sector.
A service, because there was a demand, we were able to capitalize in the right time.
Exactly.
We focused our energy there. I graduated in 2005, and I remember I passed my school around 99. So I remember that very, very clearly. It was a big push becoming IT engineer, some sort of IT engineer, because the instant opportunity was there, and that's where in numbers people went into that. So that started to become as a mass market, and there were companies that championed it: Infosys, Tech Mahindra, Wipro, Cognizant, many companies there. So that is exactly what was happening in manufacturing, say, in our neighboring country, that happened in the service sector. And there we built depth there in some of those years, and now we see that how service sector has helped to build this middle class in India. The current middle class is built by the service sector. So that gives an example that if we would have focused in 1 or 2 sectors, even in manufacturing, and capitalized on some of the opportunities, we could have built this depth in 1 or 2 manufacturing sector a couple of decades ago, which could have been different. I strongly think that the job of market creation is governed by some of the policy decisions, and the role of government is very
Very true.
probably I think few things, if we look at hindsight, if we could have taken a couple of decades ago, things could have been a bit different.
But India's domestic market is enormous.
Yes.
So, yet our Indian manufacturers are not able to provide value to the domestic market or to serve it profitability, to say in other words. What structural reason, whether land, labor, logistics, or regulation, make it hard to build volume manufacturing here when in compared to our neighbor?
I'll give you some of the key parameters here. In my view, there are three important parameters. Number one is the logistics cost.
Okay.
India's logistic costs is at around 13 to 14% of our GDP against global benchmark, which is at around 8%. So this means 5 to 6% extra Indian companies who are making this volume production are paying as extra tax, I would say. The second challenge I see is also a working capital. So I think around 3 to 4 decimal percentage point more Indian companies have to pay compared to our peers in other Asian countries. If you combine it together, this tells a story about investing in capability versus servicing the debt. So these are the two drag as I see. The number three, and I want to be honest here by saying that the standard the buyers set in India, which is good enough, is not good enough for the world.
Okay.
So we accept good enough quality in India, which forces, in a way, the manufacturers to optimize on cost versus consistency, which means they're not driven by optimizing consistency, which could help them to make million great parts, which would be needed for a global supply chain. So if you look at these three factors, the logistic costs, the working capital, and our attitude towards accepting a good enough quality, they in combine pose a challenge for a volume manufacturing. So, and I think how we address these three will help us to devise how do we go forward. So this is possible to address. There are things at the level of policymakers to government to the industry how we can address. But these are some of the challenges what restrict them from becoming a volume manufacturer.
Dr. Sanjeev, you take batches in IIM Mumbai and you have conversations with the students out there. So when you sit in a classroom with presumably the India's future business leaders and tell them what Indian manufacturing actually looks like from your vantage point, what is the reaction of the students? Is there a mismatch between how they are being educated about manufacturing and what the sector exactly looks like?
I get mixed reactions. So from time to time, I do take certain lectures from a variety of places. Like last year, I did one lecture in IIM Mumbai for one executive batch. But the reaction at different places is similar. It's a reaction of productive dissonance, I would say. What the students, and mind you, these are some of the sharpest bright students from the country. They're very good in assimilating frameworks. They're very good in understanding the framework. So what they read and understand about manufacturing from the books is very different to what they will inherit in manufacturing when they will go to work. And I see the gap. I do see the gap there. And when I mention to them that the labor productivity of India is of a fraction of what it is globally. When I talk to them, that Indian companies, a lot of them are still do not have a culture of quality, of process control. It does surprise them. For example, the labor productivity in India is around, until last year, was $67,000 compared to say $30,000 in China. So we are around 3.5 to 4 times behind even China in terms of labor productivity. So these kind of information and discussion when I have with these students, it leaves them with surprise. But what I tell them is that in the next decade, the most impactful opportunity for them is not going to come from building things in fintech or edtech, but an opportunity to transform productivity and quality and many areas in manufacturing. That's where the real opportunity is. And that is what could inspire them, and that's I have seen inspiring some of them to go towards manufacturing or start looking at a sector which can present that opportunity to make an impact. One thing I keep mentioning to them, that MSMEs in India alone employ around 110 million workers, and if you look at the credit gap on the MSMEs in India is around $300 billion. It's around 30 lakh crores.
Okay.
And if you look at the capability gap is even more larger. So the opportunity to do something very meaningful, something impactful for these students or these future business builders is here in manufacturing field. What happens that in the institutes, in colleges, majorly teach students to optimize what is available. But the kind of leaders that Indian manufacturing will need is somebody who needs to build it from scratch in such a resource constraint. So I hope that, and I not only hope, I think some of these colleges, IIM, so many other colleges of repute or even not so repute, I think the future engineers, future workforce that they will come, some of them will be driven to build this the future.
Let's hope so. So from moving from diagnosis to prescription, the blueprint that we need to have, and specifically for manufacturing and business units, builders in the audience, not the government. And if you had to name a single highest leverage thing that an Indian industrial company should be doing differently now, what would be it?
Honestly, the Indian industry that they build to do right now would be to invest in building depth, and building depth to compete on quality, not on cost, because that alone will drive them towards taking decisions which will keep them at forefront, whether it will be a global supply chain or any new sectors, or even building depth in the existing sector. So that, I would say, a single biggest thing from my side is to build depth, and depth in, I think, competing with quality.
Okay. Talking about depth, and you represent Renishaw, and Renishaw is a precision measurement and engineering company, and you have watched Indian manufacturing companies use or fail to use measurement and quality systems very regularly as a strategic lever. What does a manufacturer who is serious about moving up the value chain, if you say, actually do differently on the shop floor?
It's not so difficult to observe companies that move up in the value chain better than others what they do. Within 5 minutes of walking into a shop floor, you can observe that, because it is not about what they build, It is about what their leadership value is, what they make visible. So for an example, these companies who are genuinely moving up in the value chain, I see them doing these four things better than others. They prioritize process capability above production capability. So a lot of the successful companies, they very well know the process capability indexes for their successful products. These companies make the decision about adding new lines or new shift based on whether the current shift or the earlier line is statistically controlled or not. Number two, I see these companies giving quality the same authority as a production. Because a lot of companies, quality, yes, they hold responsibility, but they don't hold authority. But these successful companies I have seen, they empower quality with an authority to even stop a line if they think that the line is not producing quality power, which is a
Very good.
change. So these quality people get the same respect or same footing as the production in their board reviews. Number three, I see the successful companies are the ones where a supplier quality is CEO's responsibility, not a procurement responsibility. And this is very important. Indian auto component export globally is only 3%, right? Whereas if I tell you China is around, for auto component export is around 17%, and Germany used to be around 16% as well. So there's an excellent opportunity, but this number can only go up when they would spend time in building the supplier quality, the supplier ecosystem, what's happening in the supplier place, co-investing. Because remember, the quality of there is the quality of the weakest supplier. So I think I see a change. Companies who are doing good is their CEOs are taking responsibility of supplier ecosystem, not just procurement. And number four, these companies, the successful ones, they're very curious about learning from failures. Because these companies who are actually progressing on the value chain, they do a thorough analysis, the root cause of a problem. And they do not get into a blame game that whose problem is it. Rather, they look at building knowledge and learning from that and build this as their muscle power, which becomes a competitive advantage. And it's a very important shift. And I know a number of companies who look at the loss analysis or the root cause analysis more from the blame perspective. But these are the four things, like process capability over production capability, giving power, empowering quality, supply, taking accountability of the supplier ecosystem at the top of the organization, and curious about failure. These are the four things I see genuinely companies who are moving up in the value chain prioritizing.
Okay. We spoke about how China took around 20 years to build the whole ecosystem, but India does not have that kind of time or time liberty if it wants to catch up. Are there ways to compress that timeline through clustering or through anchor companies pulling up suppliers or through specific import substitutes?
I don't think we need to set a race with China, honestly. In my view, I think that would be. उसको बोलते हैं ना कि we need to first walk first, then before we run. हमको अभी जैसे the classic example is, let's say in the field of sport, let's say football. We can't today that we can't. I don't think I would set out as a goal to beat France in a World Cup final. Rather, I would set a goal to qualify for a World Cup football, right? So I think coming back, I personally feel that there is time, and I don't think we need to really set China as our main competition. That's the first thing. Now come back to answer your specific question. This decade, especially the decade that we are in today, this presents a unique opportunity. I'll give you some numbers. So, our current consumption is consumption demand is around $2.4 trillion, which will become $4.3 trillion in 2030, or is forecasted to be. The current Indian auto component export is at around $22 billion. Out of a total auto component production is around $60 billion. So this export is growing at a massive rate. I think nearly 10%, to be specific, 8.6% CAGR. So that, and the third, as I talked earlier about the mobile production, that in the last 4 years since we started, today every seventh or eighth mobile phone is being manufactured and assembled in India. So these are the anchors, so as you asked, anchoring. So there's mobile manufacturing, or Tata is building in iPhone manufacturing, or other companies are building in the electronics manufacturing, or what we're doing in auto component export. They can become an anchor industry around which supplier ecosystem can be built, because this is setting up a higher standard for suppliers to meet, a global standard for suppliers to meet, and that will create an ecosystem of supplier to start producing first high value component, or moving towards that. And when we learn that, coupled with some of the mass manufacturing things that's happening on mobile manufacturing, if we couple that well, so in this decade, so in next 10 years, we'll start to build some fundamental capabilities. Once that foundation is set, then we can build on to that. So I'm very, very hopeful that if we do these things right, probably in 20 years' time, we start to see things changing. Where we will be respect to China, honestly, that should not be even our goal. I don't think China set a bench. I don't know. I wasn't there in China. I don't know enough. I don't know whether they set that benchmark, or they looked at getting their house in order. So I think we should get first looking at our house in order, our companies in order, building our strength, our capabilities. And I'm very sure once we do that, we can achieve.
Yeah, India has structural advantages like that China did not have a large English-speaking population, technical workforce that actually, then functioning democracy, a service sector that already is a world-class one.
What we have is not sufficient enough to be successful in this sector.
Yes, that's my question.
Yeah.
So, do these advantages offset the manufacturing sequencing bus or the mistake that we did? Yeah. Or are they largely irrelevant in this particular challenge?
I think they're largely irrelevant. If that wasn't the reason, we should have been a manufacturing powerhouse now. That was a good supporting function, and that was an enabler for us to be powerhouse in service economy. Right? We are in knowledge sector, service economy, IT services. We are powerhouse because that was an enabler. Yeah. We were integrated in global supply chain there. For example, a lot of global projects had engineers working with them because we could speak their language. Yes. It was easy to work with us. Yeah. So that worked in that. But I don't think that is a competitive advantage in the engineering sector, in the manufacturing sector, because here the hard skills matter. The tooling skills matter, the fixing skills matter, the engineering skills matter, the technical know-how and the core problem solving skills matter. And that is what we have got to build. And these are tacit. They can only be learned by doing. When we set our standards high, before the market forces us to do, I tell you an example. I've seen some of the successful companies in India, their founders set not as an Indian benchmark, as a global benchmark to achieve. Yeah. So they make unilateral choices that we are going to compete with this quality standard. and then they take every decision based on that. Their hiring decision, their supplier selection criteria, their partner selection, their capital allocation, everything they base on that, and that builds depth. So that is needed. That is relevant. Not the English speaking. Those are good. Those are good things, but they are not going to help in this.
Okay. Give me your honest and unvarnished assessment on this. On the current trajectory that India is in, where does Indian manufacturing stand in 2035? Or are we going to look back and say we got our act together in the 2020s? Are we going to repeat this conversation with slightly different numbers?
So I'll give you my very honest assessment on this, and I'm going to give my opinion as a businessman. It's not a politician or any other. I honestly think that India is at an inflection point, and my belief is driven by some of the current trend in geopolitics, which is driven towards protectionism, and that is basically driving the need for more diversification in supply chain, which could work in India's favor. India's GDP is forecasted to be around growing at 6 to 7% annually for the next decade. And what's happening in, say, mobile manufacturing, to be specific. So if I look at, they're really poised for a fantastic growth in next decade.
Okay.
Provided we work on our foundational capabilities. If we are able to build foundational capabilities, which in simple terms, our process capability, our measurement capability, our supplier ecosystem, then we will be able to capitalize on the opportunities that is in front of us. If we take mobile phone industry growth in last few years as a validation and don't do anything fundamentally on the working on foundational capabilities, I'm very sure we'll be sitting here in next after 10 years and working on the same topics, maybe with the different numbers, but with more measured frustration.
Okay.
So the opportunity is there. The economics is there, the forecast is there, provided we get our act together.
Now, you have been in this sector for almost 2 decades. What keeps you going, you doing it, and is there a company, a cluster or a product you have seen in India recently that makes you think, oh, yes, this is what next chapter looks like?
My passion in last decade, or more than a decade, hasn't changed. I moved back from UK to India with one ambition, and a very clear-cut ambition, and that was to make India a powerful manufacturing economy in the world. And I was driven by that when I was having very less knowledge of the ground reality of Indian manufacturing. This was my vision in 2009, 10.
Okay.
And that is still driving me, that I still think that India can become the manufacturing powerhouse in the world. And if you look at the opportunities that are here in terms of capitalizing on the diversified supply chain, when you look at more than 110 million people working in MSME alone. So these things, when you look at the opportunities in various sectors, these things alone tell that if there is a sector where somebody can make meaningful impact, is this sector. So for me, that's not just a career, that's a calling. So I think that's why I am very passionate about manufacturing. And second thing, manufacturing is tough. Manufacturing can be unforgiving. I think it can reward discipline, and it can really destroy some like no other sector does.
Totally.
So I think that's what motivates me. The complexity of the sector. Second, the opportunity to build something that will change the country forever. And I get my hopes from, as I've spoken in last half an hour, on the basis of what I see currently, a growth in mobile manufacturing, a growth in auto component manufacturing, and the most importantly, when I look at the young engineers, young executives, they are very impatient with the way that they are not satisfied being good enough for India. They want to challenge themselves for the good enough for the world. So that impatience, in a very right way, if that can be mixed with the patience to build deep and depth, that is the foundation to change the sector. And that's what drives me and gives me hope that there's a lot that can be achieved.
That I hope that happens. So there is a version of this conversation that I thought that I will end with, but then whether the government must do X, Y, Z, I want to resist that framing. According to you, what can a founder, a factory head, or a board member change within the walls of their own business and without waiting for a policy change?
These all stakeholders, as you said, founder, factory head, or the board, they can do everything that matters the most, honestly. Policy creates conditions, as I was talking earlier, but the leaders create culture, which determines the ability to capitalize on the opportunity which will be created by policy, or watch it passing through. So these stakeholders are the most important stakeholders, and they are responsible of creating that culture. I'll come specifically one by one. So the founder's role is very, very important. The founder is the one who can decide that I want to compete on quality and not cost. And that decision alone will drive all the subsequent decisions, all the hiring decisions, supplier selection, partner selection, capital allocation, all these decisions. So that is what a founder is in control. The factory head can change the way what he does when he walks into a shop floor. The factory head can decide to ask questions about the processes, about the inputs, rather than questioning on outputs. So that's a change what is in hand of factory head. The board can also not just ask what was the EBITDA last quarter, but the board can start asking about what was the first pass yield rate, right? The board can start asking about, okay, what are the process capabilities from a top revenue product lines? The board can start asking about what did we learn from the three biggest quality mistakes that we did in last quarter. So that is in the hand of board. So if you look at these stakeholders have a lot to do. And I would say that even if the policy is being created, if these things do not change, companies will not be able to capitalize on that. And I think as I said, in what worked in China's case, that the state and the private enterprise work hand in hand. So that is a fundamental. So even in India, they will work in hand in hand. They will have to work in hand in hand. So I think the role is not about what government is doing, good or bad, should be an excuse. If we start to look at that, that's more of an excuse. That is an excuse. Who is preventing us to increase our global market share in auto component from 3% to 6%? Is the government? I think government is rather supporting it by signing a number of FTAs and trade deals with a number of countries. It is in our hands that how we increase our competitiveness to be able to every year double our export. Who is stopping us to build depth in certain sectors? If we can remember, you know how much is a smartphone manufacturing market in India? Just a guess.
Not really.
So a smartphone manufacturing market in India is around 150 to 180 million phones. In China, it is around 250 to 280 million phones. Only 55 million phones that we assemble, that is not our product. Right? We export. Imagine the opportunity an Indian company has or could have if there is an Indian company tomorrow to build our own product in India. Look at the mass market.
Yeah.
That's what China did. China did not have these smart phone players when they started to assemble and make iPhones.
Yeah.
But that they built depth in terms of technical know-how and capability. That led to developing a lot of Chinese suppliers. That led to developing a lot of Chinese companies who are now having a good market share in smartphones or other devices. So that's the kind of opportunity that is in hand of us, me, founders, business builders, other stakeholders in the country. So that's what is the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjeev. That was very interesting point of view, and it was really interesting talking to you, and thank you for your time today.